Good afternoon, everyone. I anticipate we'll continue to have attendees entering as we go through our introduction. I first want to thank everybody for joining this afternoon. This is the Education Division's final installment of the Lunch and Learn series here during the fall. We do have additional lunch and learn sessions that I will plug at the end after we have our speaker. But before I go into our speaker's introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Edie Lassiter for any opening remarks.
Thank you, Director Chang. I just want to first and foremost thank everyone, as always, for being in this virtual beloved community space. For the PHRC staff that's in this space, a heartfelt thank you, because I know that you're trending to be in this space simultaneously doing work after being in the virtual space yesterday with our second part series on addressing Islamophobia in our democracy and in our Commonwealth. So I want to also welcome those of you who were part of that virtual Lunch and Learn yesterday to this space as well. I'd be remiss if, once again, I didn't thank Director Chang for all that she's done with our series as we close out the year, all of the things that we know go into creating this on the front end and the back end with Director Amanda Brothman. So I want to thank her publicly. And lastly, I just want to welcome Dr. Miller from the University of Pennsylvania, who is a pioneer in this space well before she actually got to the University of Penn. Director Chang, S.A. Rojas, Special Assistant Rojas, and myself reached out to her in the early part of the year because I was just so impressed with her pedigree, her intellectual property. I actually went online and looked at a lot of presentations that she did, and we reached out to her. And everyone who works at PHRC, you know, we bring these people in because we do the work. We need others to pour into us because we're always pouring into humanity. But we also need to be keenly aware of where things are moving in the DEI space and in all these spaces. And we have a great person with us today. I'll end by simply saying, I just see our colleague, you don't want to start naming people, but Tia Welch, an amazing colleague, is the executive director of the West Virginia Human Relations Commission. So we have people as far as West Virginia and various other places who are joining us. And once again, thank you for being part of this beloved virtual space. You're in for a treat. Put your metaphoric seatbelts on. And this is not hyperbole. We are humbled and we're honored to have Dr. Miller here. And once again, can't do this without you, Desiree. Can't do this without you, Amanda Brothman. And thank both of you for all that you've contributed. And lastly, truly lastly, ASL. Everyone has heard me say this over the years. It is a science. It is a blessing. So we are so happy that our ASL person is here, and turning it back over to Director Chang.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Edie Lassiter. So just to give a little glimpse into the brilliance that we are blessed with today in Dr. Miller, I'd like to read her bio briefly. So Renita Miller is the inaugural Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. In this new role, and as a member of Wharton's senior leadership team, Renita is responsible for leading and developing the comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plans, partnerships, programs, and initiatives for the faculty, staff, students, and alumni of the Wharton community. She works closely with the school's leadership to integrate inclusive practices into the core academic and co-curricular activities of the school, including admissions, recruitment, faculty hiring and retention, curriculum development, training and development, and programming. She supports diversity, equity, and inclusion engagement among and across our many alumni audiences. Additionally, Renita engages with human resources to support staff hiring, retention, learning, and development, all efforts aimed at supporting and cultivating Wharton's culture of dignity, respect, transparency, and appreciation of differences. Renita brings significant experience in higher education, holding various academic and administrative positions throughout her career in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, academic affairs, program development, talent pipeline strategy and implementation, teaching, research, and training and advising. Prior to joining Wharton, Renita served as Associate Dean for Access, Diversity, and Inclusion and Executive Director of the Princeton Pre-Doctoral Fellowship Initiative in the Graduate School and lecturer in the Politics Department at Princeton University. Yes, the Princeton University. Renita was the Dean of Berkeley College, that Berkeley, and lecturer in the Political Science Department at Yale University. She is well versed in higher ed. Princeton Summer She has also served as the Director of Studies at Forbes College and the Director of the Princeton Summer Undergraduate Research Experience at Princeton University. Her teaching and research focus on understanding the influence of race and representation, with a particular focus on political rhetoric, deliberation, education policy, and leadership within political institutions. Renita was also a research fellow for the Project of Equity, Representation, and Governance at Texas A&M and the Kinder Institute of Urban Research at Rice University. Prior to her work in academia, Renita worked as an education policy consultant and pharmaceutical sales representative and trainer. So she need no further introduction. Dr. Miller, I am honored to turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for that very warm welcome. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Council leadership. That is you, that is Edie Lassiter, for inviting me to speak with you all today. And thank you for every one of you that are here to hear this presentation, that have taken the time. I sincerely appreciate you. So thank you so much. And so I'm going to just share a little bit about, myself and a little bit about sort of the research that I have done in the area of advancing equity and race and representation. And at the end of this presentation, I want to answer any questions that you have and engage in a conversation. So please feel free to share your thoughts and share your questions at the end of this. But again, thank you so much for being here. So Desiree, just a quick check-in. Can you see the title slide here? Yes, okay.
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So I'll just start out by saying, when I was in the 5th grade, when I was in the 5th grade, when I started my first entrepreneurial venture, it was a neighborhood summer camp. Before that, I was simply what I like to think of as a mom and pop shop, making what we call in the South, because I'm from Texas. I know this thing has different names in different places, but where I'm from, we call them cool cups. I used to sell them for 25 cents. And basically, this was sort of like frozen Kool-Aid in a styrofoam cup. If you know, you know, right? I know I am dating myself here. But as kids who played outside on a hot summer day, this was all we needed for a quick break and cool down from the hot Texas summer heat. I understand, like I said, in other parts of the country, these things are called different things: water ice, cool ice, ice cups, all those things. My cool cup shop was what gave me the confidence to actually start the neighborhood summer camp. And in my opinion, everything that I learned as a 5th grade summer camp director and founder, mind you, in my neighborhood in Houston, Texas, where parents paid me approximately $1.25 a day to watch their kids, was the most formative in how I approach DEI work today. And so while I had what I thought was this brilliant pitch for why the parents should entrust their kids with me for an entire day or half a day, because I did provide options, it wasn't until they started asking me really important questions that I began designing an even better camp experience for their children. Essentially figuring out what I like to think of as my business model. The marketing campaign that I had designed wasn't quite providing enough details as I had assumed. Stick figures, crayons, you get the picture. So, for instance, the parents would ask, will there be snacks or lunch? I realized that I had to provide more than cool cups. So my answer was, yes, of course. We will have beanie weenie. If you know what beanie weenie is, it's simply beans and cut up hot dogs. I will say that my culinary skills in the early days were in need of a little bit of refining, and I have gotten much better. So what happens if it rains? These were some questions that, the parents were asking. And I realized I had to ask my mom if we can have all these kids in the house if it rains. And if you know old school parents like my mom, coming inside the house smelling like outside was not going to be an option. But eventually she saw the value in what I was trying to do, and she wanted to help out her entrepreneurial daughter. And so what activities would they be doing all day? I had to figure out a program of sorts and which of my friends I could enlist to help me. Initially, I didn't have all the answers, but because of the questions that they asked, I would figure it out. That approach of building trust and being of service to my community has guided my career. But the ways in which I have been challenged in this work by the questions of our students, alumni, faculty, and staff, and not to mention the questions I too have raised, is what has actually defined my career. Because the first step in solving a problem is actually understanding it. And the only way to get to understanding is by asking questions. From my perspective, the exchange that occurs, the questions that are raised when getting to an understanding or solving a problem, that process in and of itself is deliberate deliberation. And so this is a topic I'm very passionate about, as it blends my academic research with my personal experiences as a summer camp director and founder, as well as in the trenches in higher education. However, this practice of deliberate deliberation and asking questions is not solely a pathway to understanding and problem solving. I have found that it is in fact a cornerstone for the empowerment and advancement of those from underrepresented backgrounds. In the world of business and often in life, clarity and understanding fosters confidence. We see it in our students, we see it in our faculty, we see it in our staff, we see it across the board. And what I know for sure is that asking questions is truly an act of courage, because it can be a fundamentally disruptive act that challenges the status quo in important ways. There is so much power in the deliberative process where questions are asked. I have witnessed firsthand how it drives progress and promotes equity in our communities, businesses, and institutions. So I want you to follow me for a moment, as I'm a political scientist by training, and the question I was most interested in was, does descriptive representation lead to substantive representation? And I'm going to just unpack that quickly. Descriptive representation, by definition, is simply the fact that a representative shares the same race, gender, or other characteristics as their constituents. Substantive representation is the idea that descriptive representatives actually makes a tangible impact as it relates to the representation of said group, of their interests and their concerns. Meaning that there is the idea that women are going to implement policies that address the concerns and interests of women. I, of course, thought the answer was a no-brainer. Let me take you back a few years to 1993. There was a group called the United Daughters of the Confederacy, whom I will refer to as UDC moving forward. They applied for a patent on the design of the Confederate flag. This patent would have given them exclusive rights to use the flag for commercial purposes, and many people saw it as an attempt to glorify the Confederacy and its legacy of racism. The UDC's patent had been approved without controversy every 14 years since it was first granted nearly a century ago. But Senator Carol Moseley Braun, the first African American woman to be elected to the United States Senate, objected when the patent came up for renewal in the Judiciary Committee a few months earlier. And the committee voted 13-2 to deny the patent. But Senator Jesse Helms, the bill's sponsor, brought up the proposal as an amendment to pending legislation on the President's National Service Program. With this new amendment, the Senate signaled its intention to approve the proposal on a procedural vote of 50-48. Helms contended that the 24,000 UDC members were delightful, gentle ladies engaged in charitable endeavors and deserving of the largely honorific patent protection that Congress almost routinely confers on national groups. You don't have to answer, but I would pose a rhetorical question here. How many of our institutions, our organizations, our companies advance and or follow policies and or practices because that's the way it's always been done? Senator Carol Moseley Braun, she stood up before the chamber and she gave an impassioned speech. She said, I have to tell you, this vote is about race. It is about racial symbolism. It is about the racial past and the single most episode in American history. The issue is whether or not Americans, such as myself, who believe in the promise of this country, who feel strongly and who are patriots in this country, will have to suffer the indignity of being reminded time and time again that at one point in this country's history, we were human chattel. We were property. We could be traded, bought, and sold. She noted that it was a reminder to the descendants of slaves of the horrors they suffered. As she stood in chambers, she professed that the Confederate symbol is something that has no place in modern times, no place in this body, no place in our society. Her speech prompted an outpouring of personal expressions from other members reflecting on racism, a rarity in the Senate. After which, Senator Robert Bennett of Utah made a motion to reconsider the amendment, which allowed for a second chance to vote. Ultimately, the amendment was defeated by a vote of 75-25. She single-handedly changed the debate and her colleagues acknowledged it. Then Senator Joe Biden of Delaware stated, I think you saw here today on the floor of the Senate I and others have been saying for so long, there is a need for diversity in this body. The fact of the matter is that the senator from Illinois has pointed out something that has been sorely missing from this body, that one single voice speaking for millions and millions of voices in this country who feel like this body doesn't understand their problems. California Senator Barbara Boxer said that if ever there was proof of the value of diversity, we have it here today. Senator John Chafee, Republican of Rhode Island, said, rarely on this floor are votes changed by words, but today they were, including his own. This is an example of how descriptive representation led to substantive representation. That is, the Black woman senator from Illinois, through her words and advocacy, led to the defeat of the UDC's patent application. I'm a political scientist, and so therefore, I'm often wanting to understand those tangible impacts. And this example was one of those tangible impacts that I was really able to clearly see how these definitions were defined. However, in the research, prevailing research for that matter, there's a suggestion and research that finds that descriptive representation does not lead to substantive representation. And so I found And so what I discovered during this process was that the primary measurements for substantive representation were those outcomes or outputs like roll call votes, bill sponsorship, and constituency service. Similar to the example that I just gave, that outcome of that 75 to 25 vote. Now, what I've also found is that the glaring omission in this research was the actual process before a bill was voted on. The public policy making process where those outcomes were determined. So if we were to, I know it made it seem like in this example, yes, the impact that she made was fully and only the speech that she gave, but there was so much work that was happening behind the scenes in those committee hearings and questions that were asked. And so what I found was that we needed to focus on that process, and that was what was missing in the research. And that deliberative process, that was where the magic happened. That is where amendments were added and removed and policy was shaped. In committee is where many parts of a bill never made it into final legislation. This is where there was considerable impact by minority legislators, especially women, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, and especially those that held leadership positions. Researchers have maintained that the most substantive contribution to representation by members of underrepresented groups was their ability to enhance the deliberative process. What we know is that deliberative efforts can change debates, agendas, policies, and even preferences. After countless hours of transcribing committee hearings, what I found was something I wasn't even looking for, but that was the beauty of it all, and finding answers to the questions that I didn't even ask. And that was uncovering the fact of how these legislators were effective during that deliberative process. It was not the grand speeches, which certainly has its place, but their effectiveness was simply by asking thoughtful questions, which created a mechanism of accountability. In the same way, those parents of my neighborhood summer camp held me accountable with their questions. It unearthed for me that the approach of so many thoughtful and effective leaders was asking thoughtful questions. While not asking questions or even responding haphazardly to questions being asked has been to the demise of many leaders and the root of many disasters that have occurred. Asking questions empowers us by enhancing clarity, increasing visibility, and promoting self-advocacy in our professional public environments. It also fosters meaningful relationships and challenges the status quo. I myself have worked on honing the skill of asking good questions. It truly is a foundational principle to my approach and success as a DEI practitioner in higher education, and undoubtedly is a foundational mechanism for the success in your work and how you all are able to best advocate for others and for those in the Commonwealth. So, as you reflect on the insights of today and progress in your own endeavors, I wholeheartedly encourage you to embrace the practice of asking thoughtful questions. And also, if you are leading teams, to find opportunities to create that psychological safety for the members on your team to feel comfortable asking questions. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to stop there. And now we will have time for you to ask me any questions that you have. Thank you. And I'm going to leave that slide up for just a second.
Thank you, Dr. Miller.
You're welcome.
ED, I'm going to turn it over to you and see, because I know you sent me an email directly. And
Yeah, I want us to, one, I think that we're in a space where we have time for Q&A or comments. So to Director Chang's comment, I emailed her. For me, this was brilliant. For me, this is brilliant. It was brilliant. I think that, but I want to create space for individuals. Just one little minor thing. We're the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission.
Commission, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. You know, things happen. But we do have a chief counsel, which is, you know, and we have advisory councils. But let's. I see someone has a one of the little hands up. So why don't we go to that, and I'll give it back to you, Director Chang. But
Thank you.
great presentation. Thank you. Just my comments are just thank you for bringing the lived experience into this space as well. But Director Chang, you.
Thank you. And that's what I was going to say is I love that the topic, Dr. Miller, was so simple in concept, but it's something that I think as a society and culturally we shy away from. We don't want to create waves, so we don't ask the questions. And it really is just that simple of posing a question and getting kind of the wheels turning. I have kind of a question comment, but I want to give it to our audience first and make sure that we can get through all of those. So Devin, do you want to come off of mute and ask your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Miller, for being here. I just had a question about the recent controversial resignation of the president of Penn.
Mm-hmm.
And at any time, did she consult with you or consult with your office?
No, she did not. And the president's office, if you know anything about Penn, it is very decentralized. But the president has her own team. She has her own advisory. There are a lot of people around the president. And so I've been here at Wharton for a little over a year. And I've spent most of my time with the Wharton community. And that's just the way that the institution is sort of set up, if you will. It's very sort of like the schools are their own sort of microcosm of the larger university. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My question was kind of along the same lines without getting into those political weeds, because you obviously cannot speak for the president. We know, but more so my question was just in general, we saw in that congressional session 3 women in leadership. One is a woman of color in an incredible leadership role. And your topic is, you know, be open to asking questions. And so they were, now granted, my personal opinion is they were pointed questions at the ladies. But I still think that there's value in the questions that were being asked. How, from a professional expert in this area, obviously not answering as an attorney or any guidance directive, but in wanting to encourage questions, how would you recommend, or maybe what would you, had you been consulted, or even now, hindsight, because hindsight's 2020, what do you think would be a good approach for any person, specifically woman in leadership, that is, you know, faced with these questions? Because as you said, we want an environment that is welcoming to questions, but the hard ones. What advice, if any, would you give in those situations?
Yeah, I don't know what it feels like to be a president of an institution that has so much societal impact and influence. So from that perspective, what I can say is that I could not imagine the level of pressure, the what they have to go through as leaders of the institutions that they are leading. And so I feel, and just from my perspective, I extend a significant amount of grace to any leader, because I know I can never fully understand all that they go through and all of the decisions that they have to make. And so I really can't speak to, how I would coach, a leader in that position, having never been in it, right? So I would just start there. I would say my own sort of personal approach to asking tough questions is to be as honest and forthcoming and authentic as I possibly can be. And my approach is often to, when I don't know something, to admit that I don't know something, and to express empathy and compassion when I am working and dealing with various groups, and trying to support and create communities of belonging as a DEI practitioner. So that's kind of what I can say about that. And I think over time, any community that you're in the work that I do, I find that it starts with building trust in that community. And building trust is done in various ways. It's connecting with your community. It is connecting and supporting your community. And so that's the approach that I take as a DEI leader. And I find that, if and when I screw up on any dimension, because it happens, we are imperfect, we are human. And so when that happens, I find that if I have been extending grace and creating community and building trust, then that grace is extended back to me.
My question is centered around, what do you see as the future of DEI as it relates to the work in this space? I saw, for me, in multiple roles, my role as the executive director at PHRC, as just a human being, my role with the University of Penn as the president of the Black Men at Penn School of Social Work Incorporated, that there was a lot of benevolent racism along the lines of what happened, the horrific killing of George Floyd. Everyone ventured towards having a DEI officer, Merrill Lynch, Michelob Light, Major League Baseball. And as a researcher, I wonder if come the year 2030, we're able to have a longitudinal study to see where DEI is at. On LinkedIn, over the past year, I see a lot of African American and DEI colleagues of color who are leaving DEI spaces. I see the reframing of DEI being JEDI. Then when we're sold on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, we go to EIB, equity, inclusion, belonging. That's a lot. Help us understand where you see the future of DEI. Why are so many people of color leaving DEI? And take us to any intellectual and pragmatic space that you want to take us to.
I think in the same way that you talked about how many DEI offices started, right? And I think there were the creation of offices. And I also think that there have been challenges around how to incorporate those offices into the broader sort of landscape within those organizations. And so I think when you see that mass exodus of folks, or I won't even say mass exodus, there have been an exodus in high profile positions, right, of people of color leaving DEI. And I think for various reasons, right? But I think in general, some of those reasons have been lack of leadership support, lack of financial resources, lack of sort of influence to be able to, and support around their influence to be able to sort of impact, make change. I will also say there, and what is often not talked about for the folks that are doing DEI work, yes, those were some offices that were developed, shortly after George Floyd, but there have been other organizations that have been committed to DEI for many, many years. There have been organizations that have had people doing DEI work and didn't have those titles, right? And they were committed to that work. And I will say, what I hear from, my counterparts and from the people that are doing this work, many of them feel called to it. Many people feel as though this is part of who they are and what they were purposed to do. And they understand sort of like the ebbs and flows and the lack of, because they've been in it, they've been doing the work. So it's like, we've been a part of cultivating environments, even when opposition was very strong against us, and they were still doing the work. And I think that those people they get lost in the conversation. They get lost because you see some of those high profile folks leaving, that we forget about those that have been in the trenches and that are in the trenches, and say they're going to continue to do that work, right? And so I can sort of personally speak to this from the perspective of, I often say this to other people that are like, how are you doing? Like it's hard. And I'm like, listen, my ancestors have done way more. They have endured way more than I would ever have in my lifetime. And so I feel a responsibility to honor that work and to say, in spite of all the noise, in spite of all the distractions that sort of come, when we're talking about DEI, DEI is going under, DEI, all the things, my goal is to say, like, the work continues, right? We have to keep going and we have to keep moving forward, because if the people that came before us would get discouraged from this policy or this, obstacle or this burden, then we would not be where we are today. So I really try to push back on that sort of that narrative. But not also to say that I don't disagree that there are challenges and that there are barriers and that there are things that we're going to have to work harder to move forward. But I will also say, I do think that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, through my lens, I look at it as inclusion. Because when we all, there are some times where you have to focus on specific populations because the time requires it. Because where we are in the moment, we have to serve that targeted population because they need us the most. And then you also have to say, how can I build this community so we're all supporting each other? And I don't think it's an either or. I think we can do both of those things at the same time, right? And so right now, we talk about DEI, and we have other populations that are struggling and that are needing support. If we say that we are, about community, about inclusion, then we need to wrap our arms around the communities if it is in our capacity to do. And then we need to broaden our reach, and we need to think about those communities that also need our support. And so that's how I think about the work. That's how I approach the work. It's like, sometimes, you have to focus on populations that need you. And you have to pour into them in those critical moments. And then you also have to think about the full community and what can we be doing to bring us all together.
Wow, so. I just want to thank you. I'm a student learner of humanity, and just the way you unpackage that has elevated my thought process, and I'm just encouraged to see what comes out of how I'm feeling right now. Other questions and comments that others may have for Dr. Miller while we have the time and the space here. Oh,
Devin
I
had
think-
another. I want to jump in if that's okay, Edie, really quickly, and I'll pivot to you, Devin. Well, I wanted to offer you the gift of one of Edie's catchphrases. You had said it's not either or. Edie likes to say it's both and. So I'll give you that. But just kind of looking at that other side, I agree. I echo Edie's sentiments in the way that you shifted that perspective. What would you say is your biggest win that you've seen in diversity, equity, inclusion? Because we do see kind of the backswing, right? But we know that there's wins, and that's what keep those that have been in this field and doing this work, as you had shared, well before this 3-year push all of a sudden. What would you say in your professional career that you've seen as a greatest win?
So two things, and one is ongoing. The first is in my role in the graduate school at Princeton. In the years that I was in my role, we saw historic admissions of PhD doctoral students from underrepresented backgrounds being admitted to Princeton. And part of that was about a couple of things, was our targeted, recruitment efforts, to sort of say, like, Princeton is a place for you. I know, you sometimes think of like the brand of these institutions, and oftentimes students from underrepresented backgrounds don't see themselves there. And so part of that was the work that we were doing around recruitment, but also the work that we were doing around supporting the students that were there, and building and creating a community of belonging where students feel good, because they're your biggest ambassadors. And this is in any organization, right? This is not just in an institution. And so it's a philosophy that I sort of hold. It's like, take care of your people. When you take care of your people, everything else becomes that much easier. So it's one of those things. It's like we're going to take care of our students and ensure that they feel a sense of safety, that they feel a sense of belonging, they feel included, they feel like their voices matter. In organizations, it's about doing the same thing, creating that psychological safety where they feel free to answer questions, they feel free to provide feedback, right? The demise of organizations is when your people feel like they can't criticize or even offer you feedback on something that they feel like is going to take the organization in the wrong direction. So are you creating a space where they feel like they can do that? So I feel incredibly honored by the work that I was able to accomplish there with an amazing team, to create a space where we know the importance of PhDs and the knowledge creation that they bring to society, right? And so those scholars from those different backgrounds that are bringing different perspectives, and that hopefully will be innovating in ways that are going to be game changers for society at large. So that's one. Second is a project that I'm currently working on with the School of Medicine here at the Wharton School. We're calling it the Wellness Empowerment Project, also the WE Project. And so that project, for me, so when I talk about like, we have to be able to do this work of, to your point, both and, right? Sometimes we have to take care of the populations that we're serving, and specific populations, and we also need to find ways to bring that community together. So that project is one where we're in West Philly, and we started with a wellness summit, and we came together to say, we need to sort of look at wellness from sort of a multi-pronged approach. So financial literacy, economic wealth building, all those things have an impact on health and wellness. And so we brought that project together. It culminated in the first wellness summit. We had, we brought in these large banks. We brought in these financial institutions that were a part of it. We had these amazing doctors, traumatic brain injury doctors, stroke doctors, and we brought all of that to the community of West Philly. And so now we're already, moving into the second year and really excited about building that out and what that will look like for the community and finding more ways to be in partnership with the West Philly community. That's where we live. That's a part of who we are. And we want to, be in the community and not separate. And so we're trying to find ways to build those connections. So I'm really, really proud of that. One, because we launched it, and two, because of what we hope it will be in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And then I don't want to miss Devin here. Devin, do you want to come off of mute again?
Yeah, I had two questions bouncing off of Edie Lassiter's vision into the future. One, are universities and colleges now offering study in DEI? And for those people who are leaving the practice, do we know where they're going? Are they leaving it just to leave, or are they going to bigger corporations with greater need and opportunity?
I think that's a really good question. And I cannot suggest that I know. I've done research on that exodus. There were, particularly in the there was sort of this high profile exodus of Black women in media that were leaving their positions, and that made, a lot of waves and news. And one of the things that I will say about that is that oftentimes when you see an exodus like that in an industry particularly, I don't see this happening. I see this happening in higher ed, but it is state dependent, right? So what I am noticing is that in higher ed, there are official people that are in DEI roles that are leaving the state or, moving to other positions, or their titles have changed because the state policies are sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, are basically doing away with those offices. So the LGBTQ plus offices, the cultural centers, the women's center, those offices are basically being dismantled. And they're changing the titles and moving them to like student success roles. So they're not necessarily, so some of those folks aren't leaving, they are being repurposed, if you will, in terms of those positions. And, but to go back to the other point that I was making about the people, the women in media, some of those folks, and it was 5. So they left their positions to start their own companies in consulting firms and things like that. But what I will say, and I think that is consistent, when people are leaving organizations, particularly in a DEI space, those corporations and those organizations, usually DEI is not their only problem. It is endemic in that organization. If they're having a DEI problem, then it is usually correlated with other challenges that institution or that corporation is also having. So I think it's important to look at those things, whether it's financial, whether it's leadership. And so those things trickle down because the DEI offices tend to feel those effects first and hardest. And so yes, so I think I answered your question. I hope I did.
Second one, yes, thank you. But about the offer of a major in DEBI.
Yeah. Oh, so Wharton actually 2 years ago we started a major for our undergrads and for our MBAs. So if you are an MBA student here at Wharton, you can major. DEI can be one of your majors, and then of course we have amazing faculty that are doing work in this space. We have some executive education programs as well around DEI topics, and then our undergrads can also major in DEI. And I will also say, just, you know, as a person whose work was in political science, there are other fields that, you know, depending on what your interests are, sort of are dealing with these topics from different perspectives. So in the School of Education, they look specifically at these topics as it relates to schools, right, and education. And politics, you know, it's similar. They're looking at our institutions. They're looking at laws and the courts and so on and so forth, and they're looking through that lens. So I also think, and so in business, you know, we have a DEI major, but there's so many. We have SB2 here. I think Edie Lassiter can share more about that. And so there are different disciplines that look at the challenges and issues of DEI through the lens of that discipline. And so I think you may not see a DEI major, but you will see opportunities to engage in research and engage in these topics through whatever interest you may have. So it exists, and that's what I want to say. It's always been there, you know.
Yeah.
Like those topics and those fields, it's always been there. There's always been people doing that work, and even like in African American Studies department, in sociology, in anthropology. I sometimes say, like, if I would have known what anthropology was when I was in college, maybe I would have studied it. But it's in philosophy, so it's really interesting how sometimes people want to sort of segment and pigeonhole this work under this one sort of lens. But the truth is, it is weaved throughout so many areas of our educational system and the work that we do.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing, and then for the sake of time, if there's other questions or comments, I'm glad that Devin Price asked the questions about, you know, a discipline. If you're not aware, human relations is now a course. There is a degree in human relations at Oklahoma University. And just outing myself, when I think of Oklahoma University, I think of Oklahoma Sooners. Okay, Oklahoma's getting ready to play Nebraska, you know, football game, but the Oklahoma University, they now have a track for the field that we're in, human relations. You can get a degree in human relations from Oklahoma University. It's online. PHRC is on the cutting edge of partnering with them as it relates to human relations. We're going to be doing a series of lectures at that university sometime in the spring, maybe in the fall. I don't know any other universities that have that because I haven't run the metrics, but these disciplines are very essential. The last thing I'll say, and this is, you know, not a knock against anyone that does not have these trainings. Everything is not, you know, rooted in intelligentsia per se or academia per se. But I think that we are in a point in our society where we can't dismiss disciplines. I know that our governor, and so respect our governor with signing the authorization that you don't have to have a college degree to do certain jobs. But to Dr. Miller's point, the work that we do at PHRC, you should be reading books. Not saying that you're not. You should be reading books on anthropology. You should be reading books on ethnography. You should know who Elijah Anderson is as a sociologist to look at his new work, Black and White Spaces, Demarcation of Space. You hear Director Garcia oftentimes talk about Doug Massey's book on American apartheid, still a valuable book for the moment that we find ourselves in. Because the work that we do, we need to understand that there are theoretical models, there's a science to it, there's a science to DEI, there's a science to anti-racism training. And so that helps enhance the skills that we already have. So there's a way that you can get to some of the investigative processes if you're looking at Margaret Bill Spencer's work on phenomenological variant of ecological systems theory, if you're looking at Brofenbrenner's model, if you're looking at a lot of these things, these are the catalysts, because you can't just do this work on like, well, I feel that was racism, or I don't know. Lastly, community is where it's at. Community is where it's at. Director Adrian Garcia, who's our director of enforcement, the special assistant Zulai Rojas and Stacy Waters as an outreach coordinator sat in Allentown with 15 people who we saw their pain as it relates to discrimination, all unemployed, and that's as far as I'll go. Director Chang, those of us who do outreach, and a lot of folk at PHRC do outreach. This is my clarion call, and this is just such a blessing to have this moment because Dr. Miller afforded me to step in to simply say, in the new year, those of us at PHRC, we should be thinking about 1 to 2 to 3 in-field investigations per month. You got to be able to see the people. You got to be able to metaphorically touch the people. You can't just do this stuff in the abstract. You got to be in the space with the people because you'll see the people crying. You'll see the people recounting the story. You'll see the chronic PTSD unraveling. Oftentimes it's said that it's real, perceived, or imagined. But if you ask Stacy and Director Garcia and Zulay Rojas sitting in that room, we saw the pain. We saw the reliving of, I was just whistleblowing, or I was just advocating and I lost my job and now I can't make my mortgage or I can't make my rent. And so the work of DEI, the work of anti-racism training, the work of speaking truth to perceive power, and the work of the beloved community is something that we're about. And so very blessed and so very fortunate to have Dr. Miller here, and turn it back over to Desiree Chang. If there's any other questions or comments, we have about a few more minutes. But once again, humbled that Dr. Miller is in this space, very appreciative of her talents. Please research her, and check out her work. Follow her work. It can serve as a catalyst. And lastly, truly lastly, let's not underscore the questions that Devin Price raised. There are disciplines, and if anybody at the PHRC want to further their disciplinary outlook on things, talk to your supervisors, because we want a workforce that brings the primary, secondary experiences. Everybody doesn't have to have a college degree. You got a whole bunch of, I'm not going to go there, but we saw 3 college presidents that a fundamental question was asked, right? And I'm just going to stop there, right? So, I'll say that Chad has some people in his family that are MDs and PhDs, and then we got some people that got GEDs and no degrees, and they're some of the most brilliant people in my family, right? But I'll stop there. But Desiree Chang.
I think part of this conversation, and I just want to re-emphasize that the world saw how that one question, has had significant consequences, real ripple effects, impacts. It was one question, and it was the response to that one question. And so I know sometimes we think about asking questions as such a simple, simplified way, but it truly, in the same way that question had so much power, is the same way that the questions that all of you will ask can have so much power. So I think I just want to leave you with that.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. So really quickly, I want to just go through the few comments we had. Scarlett Moyer asked if you have any lectures that can be streamed, maybe a YouTube page or anything like that.
I try not to be on the web like that.
Gotcha.
But
okay.
I am off, but I'm always happy to come and do talks. And I do lots of various speaking engagements. Yes, I do those. And I have a webpage. My webpage is www.renitamiller.com if you need to find me.
Thank you so much. And we can share that. Our communications director pushes out any content and any of that contact information. So I'm sure she's jotting that down as well. Special Assistant Rojas just wanted to underscore 2 of your statements: community of belonging and take care of your people. They really impacted her. She loved them. And just so many comments of wow and thank you so much. And yeah, lots of hearts, lots of thumbs up and all of that. And you did what we knew you'd do.
Yeah, and my,
I feel so honored to be here. Thank you.
Sorry, one last thing. Mila said, wow, impressive to see how higher ed is evolving to include those degrees. Yeah, we're really interested in ending, we're really interested in ending, and partnering around wellness, right? So we look forward to supporting you in that space. I know she's on here, but we're moving into space with our Director of Policy and Governmental Affairs, Ashley Wykowiak, and one of our supervisors at our Philadelphia Regional Office, Renita Edwards, and becoming a trauma-informed care agency. And then we're going to be developing a Director of Social Justice and Mental Health Outreach. So when communities are faced with forms of racism and discrimination and bigotry, they're traumatized. There's strength in communities. There is strength in communities. So we're going to be working with you. Looking forward to learning from you. And oh my gosh, like how do we go back to work after? Oh, we can't say that on this that is recorded. We'll go back to work and enjoy our day, embrace your day, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Edie. And again, we're over time. So for anybody interested, we do have two more series for next week. So please take a look at our calendar. And Friday, January 5th, we also have an installment, and our women's history installment is 3/4 of the way done. So just keep a lookout for the PHRC calendar. Thank you, Dr. Miller. You were phenomenal. So,
all right, have a great day.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.